1985's Attack of the Beast Creatures, also known as Hell Island, is a recently revived supernatural horror movie that seems to have quite the cult following. From what I can gather, the film was released on a limited theatrical run as Hell Island, before ending up on rotation at video stores across the nation as Attack of the Beast Creatures, where it seemingly slipped through the cracks and, outside of a very passionate cult following, it hadn't been seen again. So, what's it all about? Well, the film is apparently set in 1920. Whether that was a promotional cue or whether the information came from somewhere else, I don't honestly know. But that date isn't mentioned anywhere in this movie, but it is referenced online. As we follow a small group of passengers and crew members who've just survived a shipwreck. There's a decent chunk of survivors here, including John and Quinn, who worked as crew members, Phil, a medical practitioner, an asshole called Morgan, and 3 women, Kathy, Mrs. Gordon, and Diane. There are more survivors on board, but I'm not saying they're red shirts or anything, but anyway. The gang are drifting aimlessly in a lifeboat and have decided to take turns in keeping watch through the night in the hopes that one of them will spot an oncoming ship. They've also become aware that the boat seems to be caught in some kind of current that's pulling them away from other lifeboats and towards an unknown location. Inevitably, one of the people who was supposed to be keeping watch falls asleep, and when the gang wake up, their boat's bashing against some rocks and it appears they've drifted onto the shores of a mysterious-looking island. They shore up the boat and take one of the injured crewmates onto land and get him comfortable, with no help from Morgan, who basically tries to stop the crew giving the injured man water, and then refuses to help them get the guy off the boat and onto land. This leads to a bit of an argument amongst the gang, but John manages to pull them all together and suggests their best chance of survival is to head inland and look for people, food, water or shelter. And thus we're treated to an elongated walking montage, but something's not quite right, as we see rustling from the undergrowth and the leaves on the trees and hear strange sounds. The crew spot some of these, but dismiss it because, exhaustion, starvation and dehydration kind of diminish the ability to give a fuck. After plenty of walking, the crew decide to split up and explore a specific part of the forest, and one of the gang finds a running stream. Huzzah! Only, it's more than just a running stream. It's a running stream of acid. And in a particularly grisly sequence, we see one of the red shirts, crew, dunk his head in and pull it out to reveal all his skin's burned off, and he's basically a pulpy mess. John finds what's left of the dissolved passenger and gets Phil to remove the ladies from the situation, a recurring theme. Shit gets interesting and the first thing they do is get the ladies out of there. Even by 1920s standards, they do this a bit too much. The gang take the acid man back into the jungle and give him a proper burial, but while sorting him out, John confesses to Quinn that he feels odd, like something isn't quite right. The conversation's cut short, however, when the women discover bushes full of edible berries. While picking them, however, one of the ladies seemingly gets bit by some kind of animal. After wrapping the wound, John suggests that, as this is a good place for food, that they set up camp for the night. He offers to head back to the boat to get their emergency survival kit to help treat the wounds and some matches so they can start a fire. But this seemingly puts another 10p in the dickhead because Morgan flails into life, accusing John of wanting to sneak off, take the boat, matches, survival kit and anything else he can get his hands on, and leave the gang to die on the island while he drifts aimlessly looking for other boats. It's not clear what Morgan's intention was in starting this, but either way, John calms everyone down again and heads out with Quinn to go and get supplies from the boat. When they get down there though, they're in for something of a shock, as the injured passenger they pulled out onto the shoreline when they first landed isn't looking too well. In fact, he's in a bit of a bad way, as he seems to have been completely picked clean down to the bone. They're concerned by this revelation, but decide to keep it quiet for now as they don't want to cause any more panic. Later that night, the gang get a fire going, they have something to eat, and a series of heart-to-hearts break out as the gang check in on each other and do the whole character development thing. This is again interrupted by Morgan, who tries to wind the rest of the crew up by insinuating that they're never going to get off the island and that they're marooned there. That night, Kathy is on guard for the rest of the gang when she notices something unusual. Out in the distance is a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her, and that pair of eyes is quickly followed by about 24 more glowing eyes. She tries to wake the gang up, but they're all too slow and a full-blown ambush takes place in which 12 to 24 tiny long-haired red demon beasts savage the gang, who try their best to defend themselves before the little demons flee back into the undergrowth. After the incident, John tells the group that they can't stay on this island anymore and that as soon as the sun comes up, they're going to go back to shore and get off the island. However, overnight, the beasts have made it to the shore, unmoored the boat and pushed it out to sea. From here, strange goings-on begin to happen on the island. The gang slowly work their way back to the shore, but Morgan's hurt pretty badly and moans that he's worried the gang will just abandon him, which they promise him they won't repeatedly, to the point that I kind of wish they had. They all get attacked multiple times by the beasts again, and the temperature on the island begins to sharply rise to near tropical levels, causing concern. But when the gang stumble on what appears to be a freshwater stream, they decide to stop for a refresh, but is this a wise idea? Well, it's here that we enter our final act as the beasts regroup for another attack. Will John and the gang make it off the island? Will Morgan have a gammy leg for life? And just who is the idol that the beast creatures worship? Well, some of these things will be answered if you check out Attack of the Beast Creatures. And when I first heard about this film, I was genuinely intrigued. To hear some of my associates talk about it, you'd think this was a 5-star cult hidden gem of trashy DIY cinema. Some kind of makeshift masterpiece that would have you in riotous stitches of laughter and applause from minute one. Indeed, the fact that the re-release of this film actually sold out completely across multiple websites before its actual launch date even, had me convinced that this was some kind of forgotten video store classic. In many ways, I really wish it was that way, because it pains me to say that while this film definitely does have its moments, it's got its fair share of problems too. Probably the biggest gripe I can level at this thing is its script, and that's to say that while the initial plot pitch, a group gets stranded on a mysterious island, explore it and discover a ton of hidden dangers and a tribe of tiny demon creatures who want them dead, is a solid enough pitch, whether it's due to inexperience on the part of the crew or the low no-budget nature of the film itself, the result is a film that really quite struggles to keep up the pace and momentum. For starters, the actual script itself is heavily stuffed with not even veiled attempts at padding. A not insignificant chunk of this movie could best be described as the gang wander around the jungle in montage format for an overly long time, very rarely encountering an obstacle to help give the illusion that there's a break in the flow and that this isn't just 20 minutes of people wandering around in the woods. The heart-to-heart moments are a nice change of pace to the wood wandering, they're predominantly character development pieces. But they don't even attempt to tie that character development back into the main narrative. Why should I care that one of the characters is the daughter of an Iowan farmer and that she enjoys whittling if none of the skills that come with being a whittling Iowa farmer's daughter actually come into play in the movie? There's plenty of scenes like that, probably the most confusing one being a brief heart-to-heart between Quinn and Morgan, where Morgan reveals the reason he was on the cruise ship in the first place was because he's been having trouble walking and his doctors recommended he take a cruise to help him work on that a bit. I assume it's an attempt to give Morgan a bit more depth beyond asshole, and if I squint I could maybe infer that this is foreshadowing to the fact that in the middle of the film Morgan gets his legs savaged by the beast creatures and can't walk too good. But they do nothing with that added depth to his character. They just mention it once in these heart-to-heart scenes and then he goes back to being an arsehole right up till his final scene. Remove the padding and what's left isn't actually half bad. The fights with the beast creatures are really good fun, the acid face wash scene near the beginning is well handled, and the ending, given the genre, is pretty standard, but handled about as well as it could be. I honestly think this would have made a much better 30 to 45 minute short feature rather than the 80-ish minutes it ended up as. Truncating the padding and removing some of the less relevant heart-to-heart moments would have left this script as a tight little package of decent thrills and weird but awesome fight scenes. And because the script itself is so basic, it wouldn't be difficult to maintain the key plot beats and concentrate them into a much more coherent work. What probably didn't help the production is the fact the film began life as a friend of the director basically saying, I have this idea for a movie, a guy gets stranded on an island, finds a lake, goes to wash his face, it's acid, and then when pressed for more of a pitch he said he had nothing. That was the starting point these filmmakers worked with. The beast creatures, the shipwreck, everything else came after, and it's resulted in a film that feels very freeform. With the acid and the beasts being the only thing that the budget could allow for, it means once the beasts are introduced at the start of the second act, the film kinda has nowhere to go beyond that point. Now, to their credit, they do maintain the tone they're aiming for, a slightly campy and melodramatic bizarre horror throughout the entire runtime, The dialogue's passably okay, and they clearly realised the pacing was a bit off while making the movie because they have attempted a bit of a course correct by filming additional attacks, more arguments, another couple of acid scenes here and there, which they've inserted in amongst the walking footage to help keep the momentum up on the film, or at least to try in vain to prevent it becoming overly dull. I'd say it kind of fixes the issue, but the root cause, i.e. way too much padding to begin with, outstrips any attempt to cover over those issues substantially. Ultimately, what we're left with is a script that gives off good vibes, that's tonally consistent throughout and has some really fun, wacky and decent moments, and is clearly a homemade attempt from some first-time filmmakers to get a movie off the ground, but because it struggled to hit that feature runtime and had to do a lot of watering down to get there, it's a lesser product as a result, which is a bit of a shame to me. As mentioned, the film initially came about as a result of a conversation between the director of this movie and a friend. The job of actually putting pen to paper fell to Robert A. Hutton, who has one credit, this film, and that's it. Though even he admits that a lot of the film was a kind of suck-it-and-see approach, with them spitballing ideas with the ones they could afford winding up in the script. The film was directed by Michael Stanley. He has 2 credits, with his last being in 2008 for a movie called Doing Agatha. This would be his first attempt at direction, and I feel that does make a lot of sense. Because, on the direction front, it's fine. Like, given they were dealing with a skeleton crew, I think they've done a fine enough job of both wrangling together all of the elements to deliver a watchable experience, and there's a little bit of stylisation thrown in there too. But it does all feel a little overly safe to me. Like, outside of that one decent acid attack effect in the opening, there isn't really a whole lot going on here with which a director could do something interesting. As a result, the end product is a film that maybe stands out as a unique work in its own right 3 or 4 times across the whole runtime, but otherwise feels like a passable, backsliding into poor quality experience that left me kinda shrugging in a nonplussed way. There's absolutely scope for this to have been a tighter ship, there's absolutely scope for this thing to have had much more stylised takes to help give the director a sense of vision, but given this was a lot of the cast and crew's first and only film experience, I can't really berate them for not opening with The Godfather in terms of direction. Cast direction is mixed. If I'm being speculative, I don't think there was a lot of cast direction done on this movie outside of the director maybe telling the cast what scene they were filming and how far into the scene they'd be shooting at that time. It very much feels like the cast are using their initiative here in regards to what would make the scene work, with only the death scenes seeming to have had any sense of orchestration and planning behind them, presumably because they were scenes that cost the most money and they couldn't afford to do a ton of retakes. As such, it very much depends on the mood of the cast as to how animated vocally and physically they get. Some scenes they'll move around the location and work with props. Others they'll either bolt themselves in place and deliver the lines yawningly, or they won't even bother to stand, they'll just crouch or sit. It's not the greatest control of a cast I've ever seen, but at least the cast here do seem somewhat trained and are able to get through the scene with a degree of professionalism. What does heavily swing in this film's favour for me, however, is the Cine, which, for a first-time crew, is actually pretty bloody solid. We have a decent mix of largely well-composed shot types, there's a solid amount of B-roll captured to help give the more padded sequences a real boost, they utilise colour nicely with lush greenness of the forests and jungles really popping and contrasting against the raw redness of the beast creatures' designs. They utilise some really nice depth of field shots throughout this thing, which really helps give it a big boost in terms of the quality of production, and the practical effects, as mentioned, are cheap and cheerful, but surprisingly well handled, and again, because they use vivid red blood here, it really helps create another nice contrast against the woodland setting. There's some really decent use of model work and matte paintings. The wooden totem that the beast creatures worship is literally an A5 pane of glass that they painted a totem onto, and these have been edited together fairly well, though I will admit the edit's a little loose here, which, again, I'm putting more down to the limitations of the crew than an intentional sloppy job. In fact, barring a few wobbly handheld shots that don't have a sense of composition, the day for night footage at the beginning of the film, which is just awful, and the odd stray shot of the beasts not looking their beastiest, I'd say all things considered they've done a decent job here. My criticisms are more nitpicks than anything else, as there wasn't really anything glaringly awful on the Cine front that I can complain about. They just did the best they could with what they had. Performance-wise, it's not great. The cast aren't awful, but as mentioned, a lot of their performances seemingly come down to what they could or couldn't be asked to do that day. Like, I need to be clear, at no point do they go above a passable performance here, but when they're in the groove and feeling like they're able to experiment with the location space, I feel they do a decent enough job. Obviously, it's a bit of a case of crap in, crap out, and if you're going to be given a less than stellar script from a dialogue perspective, you can only really polish what's there. As a result, a lot of the line deliveries here do feel a bit unnatural. My guess being that they were a somewhat inexperienced set of actors and they weren't given much in the way of wriggle room when it came to delivering their dialogue. As a leading man, Robert Nolfi just falls short for me as John. He has the look, but I personally don't feel that he has the presence of a leader, which is what he's trying to play here. He's probably the second best person in terms of line delivery on this front, but his physicality is hit and miss in my opinion, and it's unfortunate that to me, when the scenes that really needed him there come up, he'd more often swing and miss than hit it. I do have to give some kudos to John Vicola as Morgan. He's pretty much asked to play a snobby asshole, and he goes above and beyond in his performance here in creating a thoroughly unlikable character. As he's an older gent, the requirement for animated physicality isn't entirely needed here, and I think that acts as a bit of a saving grace as it allows him to play things a little slower and purposefully, and it lets him add an extra layer to his maliciousness which bubbles just below the surface. He's so unkind to the rest of the characters in this thing that he's absolutely watchable throughout. As for the rest of the cast, I kind of feel they don't really get their moment to really define themselves as anything other than supporting. All of them get a character development style heart-to-heart, but because the details aren't relevant to the ongoing plot in any kind of meaningful way, it's, if anything, left me feeling less connected to the characters than had they just not bothered and made the film shorter. Their performances range from passable to just creeping into poor for me. There's no out-and-out awful performances here, which is good, but I was left with the chronic feeling that had the director had just a tiny bit more experience or a firmer hand on the rudder, or if the cast were just that little bit more confident in their abilities, this whole film could have been a very different ballgame. As it stands, well, I can think of worse performances to be stuck with for an hour and a half. And finally, the soundtrack. And as is the case with any 80s horror movie, you better believe this thing's going down with a cheap and cheerful, entirely synth-based score. But here at least, it does sound like something a little more standout than your usual slasher synth fodder for the day. It's utilised really well across the runtime, and in places it can be genuinely mesmerising to listen to. Don't get me wrong, it's not one you'd rush out to grab an isolated release of, but within the context of this film, it's a really good fit that more than does the job. Oh, and it would be amiss of me not to mention that, for some reason, at 2 or 3 points in this film, the dialogue track goes to absolute shit. Don't ask me why, and it's only very briefly, but for about 30 seconds, the really nice studio-grade dialogue tracks vanish, and it sounds almost like someone was recording the dialogue on set using a wax cylinder and a needle. We swap from a very controlled soundtrack to open-air recordings where the wind's blowing down the mic and you can hear the trees rustling more than the actual dialogue being spoken, which, in and of itself, is heavily compressed, buried in amongst the noise and barely audible. In total, it probably affects about 30 to 45 seconds of the overall runtime, and that's spread out, but it does need mentioning. Attack of the Beast Creatures was shot in 1983 and received a handful of small and private screenings under the title of Hell Island through 1984. In 1985, it finally got distribution on VHS in the US by World Video Pictures, who retitled the movie Attack of the Beast Creatures and, in doing so, somewhat spoiled one of the nicer twists the film had. I'd have loved to have been at one of those Hell Island screenings to see the audience reaction when they're watching this fairly standard shipwreck movie that's going fairly pedestrian, only to see all hell break loose when the demons come out of nowhere in the second act. It may have received a bootleg release on DVD at some point from a company called Cryptflix, but I'm having some trouble figuring out if the cover I've seen for said release is just a fan art project or an actual bootleg that did the rounds. In either case, in 2023, AGFA finally gave the film its first official home video release, and its first official physical release in 38 years, when they released it on Blu-ray, where it sold out faster than any other AGFA title I've seen before, and at the time of writing it may well be sold out again. It's worth keeping an eye on that, however, as I'm told they do restock fairly regularly on some of their standard edition titles. The picture quality here is rock solid. This is absolutely the best that this film will ever look, and barring a couple of sound issues, which I assume are on the original print, this is just a gorgeous package that really gives this film a new lease on life over the murky and 35-plus-year-old VHS release. It looks incredible. Extras are a little thin on the ground. There's the option to watch the film with a partial commentary from the director, an 8-minute interview with the writer and director of the movie, 19 minutes of test footage for the practical effects and puppetry, and the option to view the film as it was on its 1985 VHS release. This is way more than I could have asked for a movie like this, though if I was being very nitpicky, and Lord knows I like to be, it maybe would have been nice to have had a full commentary for this thing to help flesh out more of the behind-the-scenes detail. Even maybe a mini making-of featurette or a trailer would have just been enough to tip this into a great package. As it stands, it does feel a little bit thrown together on the extras front. It did leave me wanting to learn more. All in all, I have to be honest and say that while this film has some decent moments, it also comes with a lot of baggage that really stops it ever truly becoming great, in my opinion. It clearly has a lot of heart and passion put into it, and it shows in the solid cine, the attention to the practical effects, and the love that's expressed from the writer and director towards this film. It's got heart, and I'm absolutely here for that. But that script is so wobbly in terms of padding and plotting that I feel unless you have a lot of patience for that kind of thing, I fear you may not make it to the best parts because you'll get hung up on all the traipsing through woodland and conflict resolution going on. As such, I can't hand on heart recommend this release at its current full retail price. But I will say if you find it going cheap, if it's on sale, or if you do have a high tolerance for melodramatic padding, I'd absolutely check it out. You have to go through a lot to get the rewards that this film can offer, but when it does show up with the goods, it's positively brain-melting.